steps of the pre-trip on the engine compartment. I want to start by looking underneath the truck to make sure that there are no leaks. Next, I'm going to come around here and I'm going to check my belt-driven alternator. I'm going to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured, that it is not cracked, bent, or broken. All my electrical wires are correctly attached. I want to make sure that the belt is not cracked or frayed, and that the free play is between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch. Next, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to check my general hoses on the passenger side. I want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured on each end. I want to make sure that they're free of any abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they're not leaking. Next, I'm going to come around here to the driver's side. On the driver's side, since I was already dealing with hoses, it's fresh in my mind, I'm going to continue to check my driver's side general hoses. I'm going to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured on each end, and that they are free of any abrasions, bulges, and cuts. They're not leaking. I'm going to check the coolant reservoir. I want to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It's not leaking, and that it is filled to the manufacturer specification. I will go ahead and make sure that the cap is tight. I'm going to check my engine oil level. I want to make sure that it is filled to the manufacturer specification. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to check my belt-driven water pump. I want to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. Also, I must check the belt to make sure that it is not cracked or frayed, and that the free play is between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch. From here, I'm already next to my power steering fluid reservoir. I want to check this to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking, and it is filled to the manufacturer specification. I'm going to go ahead and check the cap to make sure that it's secured. From here, I'm going to look on the back. There are hoses, so I'm just going to follow those hoses all the way back to my gear-driven power steering pump. I want to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. Behind it, you will find my gear-driven air compressor. I'm going to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. Now I'm going to come all the way back up here where I started, and I'm just going to drop down to my power steering gearbox. I'm going to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. I'll also check my power steering hoses. They make sure that they are properly mounted and secured on each end. They're free of any abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they're not leaking. Now I'm going to check my steering linkage. I'm going to check my pitman arm, my drag link, and my tie rod to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. They are not cracked, bent, or broken. I'm going to check each of my 3 castle nuts and cotter pins. I'm going to make sure that the castle nuts and the cotter pins are properly mounted and secured. They are not cracked, bent, or broken. They're not missing. Next, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to check my spring hangers. I want to make sure that they're properly mounted and secured on each end, because there's 2 ends. I have to mention that each time. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. I'm going to check my leaf springs to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured on each end. They are properly mounted and secured on each end. They are not cracked, bent, or broken. I want to make sure that the leaf springs are not shifted. I'm going to check my U-bolts. I want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken, and that there are none missing. From here, I'm just going to go ahead and look at where my shock absorber attaches. So I'm going to check my shock absorber to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured on each end. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. I'm going to check my brake hose. I'm going to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured on each end. It's free of any abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it is not leaking. I'm going to check my brake chamber. I want to make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and is not leaking. I'm going to check my push rod and my slack adjuster. I want to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken, and with the brakes released, I cannot pull out by hand more than 1 inch. Next, we're going to come in here and we're going to check the brake drum. I want to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. I'm going to check the brake friction material or the brake shoes to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. They're free of any oil or debris, and they are not worn dangerously thin. I want to check my steer tire. I'm going to make sure that it is free of any abrasions, bulges, or cuts on both sidewalls and the tread. The tread should have no less than 4/32 of an inch. I want to make sure that it is filled with air to the manufacturer specification, and I will check that with an air gauge. I want to check my rim. I want to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is free of any unauthorized welds or holes. I want to check my lug nuts. I want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. They are not cracked, bent, or broken. None are missing. I want to make sure it's free of any rust or powder residue around them. And I want to make sure that there are no cracks around the lug nuts. I want to check my hub seal. And want to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. It's filled to the manufacturer specification, and none of the bolts are missing. This concludes my engine compartment pre-trip.